Hello everyone. You will see that I haven't managed to get to the hairdresser since my last video, and it's getting longer and longer by the day. Now today I want to talk about one of my favourite subjects. Now back in 1964 I worked at Highgate Library. I was a mini-skirted teenager. Yes, I know, difficult, but suspension of disbelief is all. And in that year 3 books came out which shaped my reading for the rest of my life. One of them was Nicholas and Alexandra by Robert Massey, which started me off on being interested in all things Romanov. The second was a biography of Patrick Bronte by Locke and Dixon called A Man of Sorrow, which also started me off on my Bronte reading. And the third one was this one, Victoria R.I. by Elizabeth Longford. This in fact is an old withdrawn library copy. I can't think who put it in for withdrawal. Pre-Kindle, pre-internet, paperback, hardbacks were very expensive. People reserved them at the library. And we had 8 copies of this on the go. Yes, 8. Those were the days where councils actually encouraged and spent money on libraries, but that's a discussion for another day. People could only have it for 2 weeks and it could not be renewed. So I had to wait until the reservations were finished. I was in charge of reservations at the time, and I read it. And I was totally enthralled. You have to remember that before this book was written, all biographies of Victoria, say Hector Bolitho, Benson, Lytton Strachey and others, were terribly reverential and didn't say anything at all that they thought might be a case of lèse majesté. In this book, Lady Longford showed Victoria as a living human being, not some great icon to be revered, and we learnt all about her. I suppose you could say it was warts and all biography. And we learned about Victoria's fights with Albert, her tantrums, whatever. Now, a few years ago there was a documentary on the BBC about Queen Victoria's children, which made her out to be a ghastly mother. And it made me very angry. She wasn't a huggy, touchy-feely mother, I mean that was obvious, but she was devoted to them and took an enormous interest in their upbringing and welfare. Her diaries and letters show this quite clearly. And in many ways, when you read her letters and her worries about them, she sounds just like any other mother. But of course, she wasn't. I mean, I think she was a working mother, but people laugh if you say that. Now, I want to remind everyone that she had 9 children. 9 in 17 years. Also remember, she was tiny. She was only 5 foot, and yet she produced 9 healthy children who lived. Okay, Leopold was a haemophiliac, but he also lived till he was in his 30s. Victoria, of course, was a carrier of this disease. Now, at an age when getting any child into adulthood was a miracle, when the death rate was so high, this was really something. Okay, you might say, well, Victoria had the best of everything. They didn't live in poverty and squalor. Well, yes, that's true, but even so, she had these 9 children. Now, those of us who are parents, 2, 3, perhaps more children, know that you're going to get fed up with your children on occasion. They're going to irritate you, and there will be some you get on better with than others. It's natural. And with 9 children, it's pretty clear that Victoria at times, they probably drove her mad. Now, after reading the Lady Longford book, I felt very sorry for Albert, having to put up with this virago, this harridan. But after reading this book, which was published in 2016, and if you'd read no other biography of Victoria, read this one, Julia Baird. When it came out, I thought, do I need to read any more? but boy am I glad I did. This is an absolutely brilliant book. And we see another side to Albert, a side which I had rather suspected. Now, it's very clear that after each birth, Victoria suffered what we now know as postnatal depression. She received very little sympathy, and Albert was particularly obtuse and unhelpful. Now, I have to say here that a lot of men can't cope with it. It's something that is beyond their ken. I'm not making this just to say men are awful, because they're not. It's a horrible thing, and if you haven't had it and you're not suffering from it, it's very difficult to understand. But all Albert did, when Victoria really wanted perhaps him just to put her arms around her and give her a hug, he withdrew, went to a room, and he wrote her letters. Now here's one. I am trying to keep out of your way until your better feelings have returned and you have regained control of yourself. You, on the other hand, want to talk it all over with me again. You make a parade of your suffering before my eyes, so as to make me feel your reproaches still more keenly. Bless. I am ready to ignore all that has happened and take a new departure and try in future to avoid anything which might make you unhappy and your state of mind worse. Cure it, I cannot. You alone can do that. And then later, after another birth, I can give you a good certificate this time. Certificate? And I'm pleased to witness your own improvement. My advice is to be less occupied with yourself and your own feeling. Now, quite frankly, queen or non-queen, if my husband said that to me, he'd be in deep, deep trouble. Now, my opinion of Albert has undergone a change. She adored him. Victoria adored him. When she first saw him, she wrote in her journal, "It was with some emotion I beheld Albert, who is beautiful," and she underlined that 3 times. Now, yes, at first I think Albert was in love with Victoria. It's fairly clear from their letters that he loved her. But they were, I felt, really unsuited. Albert didn't make friends easily. He didn't have any friends at all. I think the closest he got to a good friendship was with his secretary, Charles Anson, who at first he didn't want to have because he'd been chosen by Victoria. But they became very close. But he had no friends, no one you could sit down and chat to. And he kept his feelings hidden, whereas Victoria was a true Hanoverian, liked it all out in the open. It's very clear when I read the Julia Baird biography, in letters to his mentor, Stockmar, it was the plan all along that he would be in charge. And by keeping her pregnant, which she objected to all the time, but she did like her fun in bed, as she called it, it made her totally dependent upon him, plus the fact that she suffered from this postnatal depression. And there were plenty of courtiers who were pleased that there was a man in charge. Okay, now I'm not going to go into talking about all her children because I'd be here all day, but I have to flag up a couple of things. Now, first of all, Albert died at 42. It was a terrific shock. Nobody expected it. I think that he died, he actually said that he had no particular love of life and that if anything he was ill, he wouldn't fight it, whereas he knew Victoria would. But there was no inkling that he was ill. His doctors kept it very quiet. They didn't alert the public at all. So when he died, it was a seismic shock. And if you want to read a really good book about what happened afterwards, I can recommend Magnificent Obsession, Victoria Albert and the Death That Changed the Monarchy by Helen Rappaport. Now, she is one of my favourite writers. She's written books about the Romanovs and the Russian family. And this take on Victoria is wonderful. Now, she may have been the widow of Windsor, she may have been bereft, but the point I want to make here before I say anything else is that she kept on working. She didn't sit there all day wallowing in misery, she worked all the time. And over the years, her natural strength of character and her personality, which quite frankly had been, you know, more or less thumped, not thumped, that's the wrong word, but Albert had sort of flattened her, made her feel inadequate and ill-educated. Well, she may very well have been, but she was shrewd, and she had a line to her people. She understood them more than Albert ever did, despite all his brilliant and academic achievements. Now, I'm going to talk about two children. I can't talk about all of them. As I said, we'd be here all day. Now, I've got a few notes here, because I gave a talk on Victoria some time back. Albert was exceptionally close to his elder daughter, Vicky. She was clever and precocious, and she shared with him his love of music and literature and could meet him on an intellectual level. Okay, listen to this. She began to learn French at the age of 18 months and German when she was 4. She also learned Greek and Latin. From the age of 6, her curriculum included lessons of arithmetic, geography and history, and her father tutored her in politics and philosophy. Okay. Now, when she was 15, she met the Crown Prince of Prussia. This was arranged by Albert because he felt that having a daughter, and one as clever as Vicky, on the throne of Prussia would bring about a united Germany. I feel he sacrificed his daughter, even though he loved her. She fell in love with Frederick, but she was 15. And I'm sorry, though she seemed to be devoted to him for the rest of her life, I really cannot believe that at 15 you know what you're doing. Now, Albert wrote to Frederick, the fiancé, obviously trying to impress him about what a wonderful wife he was getting. And he said, "Vicky comes to me every evening from 6 to 7, when I put her through a kind of general catechism, and in order to give precision to her ideas, I made her work on certain subjects by herself and bring me the results. Thus, she is now engaged in writing a short compendium of Roman history." Now, quite frankly, why Frederick didn't run screaming into the night after reading that, I do not know. So at the tender age of 17, off she went. And Albert wrote, "My heart was very full when you leaned your forehead on my breast and gave free vent to your tears. I am not of a demonstrative nature, and therefore you can hardly know how dear you have always been to me, and what a void you've left in my heart." Well, Vicky went on to have a pretty, I think, horrid life. She had no influence at the court at all. Bismarck, who was well aware of Alfred's timetable, made very sure of that and spread lies and misinformation about her. Vicky wasn't particularly tactful or subtle, and having been brought up by her father to believe she was right in everything, well, didn't exactly go down very well. Her husband was a fairly weak man as well and didn't stand up to his father. Now, she had 8 children, 8 for heaven's sake. And we know all about the elder one, who became the Kaiser and who resented his disability, his withered arm, all his life. And he began to dismiss his parents, not be interested in them. And of course, this was encouraged by Bismarck, who appealed to his love of the military and inculcated William with an arrogance that grew as he matured. When the old emperor died eventually and Frederick took his place, by then he was suffering from cancer of the throat, and he died within 6 weeks. William could hardly wait to ascend the throne. Now, Vicky had no illusions about her son, and a few months previously, when visited by, I think it was Ponsonby, but I could be wrong, from Victoria's court, she had him take back in his diplomatic baggage all her letters, papers, all her correspondence with the Queen and everybody else. And it's just as well she did this, because as soon as Frederick died, Wilhelm had her palace surrounded by armed guards, and he went through all the correspondence to see if he could find anything to prove she was a traitor. Well, she died relatively young of a very painful form of cancer shortly after her mother, and really led a horrible life. I think Albert would have been very distressed if he could see what he sent his daughter to. Now, could I just mention that this is a very good book to read about her. An Uncommon Woman, The Empress Frederick by Hannah Pakula. Now, this was written some time ago. I've tried to see if there's a more up-to-date biography, but there isn't. This is a very, very good read, but it was published in 1996, and things are always worthy of an update. But this is well worth getting hold of. And now I come to Bertie. Now, I have a great fondness for Bertie. His childhood was pretty miserable. The educational routine that was forced on Bertie, it was very clear that this was the routine that his father had as a child. His father loved it. Bertie didn't. Bertie was a nice, kind boy, but he was no intellectual. His true talents were those of charm, sociability and tact, and Disraeli described him as informed, intelligent and of a sweet manner. Now, he threw tantrums and had, through the pressure imposed upon him, and of course the fact that he was being constantly compared to Vicky, he formed an alliance with Alice, who was more sympathetic to him. But Vicky really lorded it over him. She wasn't subtle. Now, the way he was treated as a child has been described as cruel, not just by modern standards of education, but by people at the time. So why did Victoria allow it? The answer, of course, is that it was Albert's idea, and everything Albert said or did was perfect. Albert wished to have a son the same as him, and Victoria agreed and concurred in this. But it's very clear that Victoria, I also think, gave into this because in Edward she saw herself. A true Hanoverian, not intelligent, not intellectual, intelligent but not intellectual. And she saw all the worst traits of her in him, her temper, her lack of control, and of course her sex drive, which was powerful. And so she felt that this needed to be reined in. Well, it made for a very, very miserable time. And of course, when he did eventually lose his virginity, when he was about 18 or 19, Albert went potty, absolutely potty, and harangued him, and the sort of thing that nowadays you would accept, or in fact that most people in Victorian times accepted, but Albert was not that kind of father. Well, of course, Albert went to see him in Cambridge, went out for a walk in the rain with Bertie, reduced him to a quivering wreck, came back with a terrible cold, took to his bed and died. Now, I'm not going into the details of why he died. There's various books written about this. Typhus, or typhoid, I'm sorry, I can always get the two mixed up, was originally thought, but in Helen Rappaport's book about Albert, she comes up with Crohn's disease, which, if you look it up, sounds right. So they married Bertie off early to Princess Alexandra, hoping a marriage would settle him down. Well, it didn't. Of course it didn't. The thing is, I could talk about Edward for ages, but he was a devoted son. He took an awful lot from Victoria. She wrote letters to him constantly, bringing him down. He never lost his temper with her. He never harangued her back. His correspondence was destroyed when he died, and I'm really sorry about that. He was a devoted son, and in turn, whenever Bertie got into trouble, which was a lot, Victoria supported him. She had his back, I think is the current expression. When he was ill, he nearly died, she was there at his bedside. I think she really loved Bertie, and I think he loved her right back. When she was old and dying, he went to sit with her, and she asked if she wanted anything, and she replied, yes, kiss my face, which I think is rather sweet. Now, a superb book on Edward VII was written years ago by Philip Magnus, but then 3 or 4 years ago, this one, The Heir Apparent by Jane Ridley. Oh, this is a really good book. It's beautifully written, it's got everything that you could possibly want. And Jane Ridley, obviously, is very fond of Edward too. I'm trying to find the quote, if I can remember where it was. I should have looked this up before I started talking. Acknowledgements, I can't. No, she said that she enjoyed spending time with Bertie, and she hoped that the readers would too. Well, I did. I thought it was a wonderful book. Now, I've mentioned that as the widow of Windsor, Victoria carried on working. She never gave up. She was miserable. She was unhappy. Of course she was. When Albert died, she said, "There's nobody to call me Victoria anymore," which I found incredibly sad. But what I also liked was in her letters to her daughter, the Empress Frederick, and it was a huge correspondence. In one of these letters, I can't remember what it was referring to, she said, "I fear I am about to do something that dear Papa would not like." And I thought, yes, good for you. As you will have gathered by now, I love Queen Victoria. I think she's a wonderful woman, totally fascinating, warts and all, and there are so many books on her. I will list the ones I have mentioned on my blog, but the Julia Baird biography is the one to get. So thanks again for listening, everybody. And I hope by the next time I do a video, I'll have managed to get to the hairdresser and have a bit of a tidy up. We shall see. Bye, everyone.